All right. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome back to another Learning Tech Talks, where we are exploring the landscape of learning and workplace technology, among many, many, many other things. I'm looking forward to today because we are talking about one of what I think is the most ubiquitous terms in the employee technology space right now, employee experience, and the magnificent EXP, which is the new category, newish category that came out. But we're going to have a really candid conversation about this and what that means and some of the confusion around it. We're going to talk about what employee experience really looks like, some of the challenges we're dealing with, and how tech isn't a magic bullet, but done right can be a very powerful tool in doing that. And to help me navigate that conversation is Nikki Hoyland, who is the co-founder of Huler. And we met, Nikki. First of all, thanks for making the time. We've been meaning to get together and do this live stream for quite some time. So I'm actually glad we finally made it happen.
Yeah, it's been a while, right, where we get to talk geeky and nerdy, but we just never recorded it. So hopefully,
that's the thing. We've had these conversations before. We just never actually recorded and broadcasted it. So we thought, you know what, we should rectify that.
Definitely.
So we're gonna dig into this, but as we kind of get things rolling here, start digging into it. Nikki, why don't you share, because I have a pretty good sense, but even remind me, where are you located in the world?
Yeah, so we're UK based, have a presence over in the States as well, just in terms of clients. I'm myself based in the not so sunny Manchester. It's currently raining. But yeah, UK based predominantly. But we work inside, as you say, we have a EXP platform, our SaaS product. We have a bespoke team of development where essentially the conversations are always, hey, can it just? And we go, sure, of course it can. We build it specifically for you. And that's generally,
I suppose, if you're in the employee experience category, you kind of in some ways have to, because it is probably a pretty broad. There's not like, no, actually, we don't think that's part of the employee experience.
Yeah, and we have loads of clients that, you know, they want to build something, whether that's succession planning, career frameworks, LMSs, LXPs, whatever, but they want to build it in their exact own mold because they don't want a process of the way the system works to define how their internal processes always work. Okay. And we have a content arm to what we do as well. So that gives you a bit of a flavor of what we're about, but ultimately utilizing technology to make people better.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to get into what that actually means and how that's coming together, because inevitably, even just as we were backstage talking about this, there's complexity and nuance in this that is so important. But what actually jumped out is you said it was raining there, which is interesting because I did a webinar this morning with some folks in London and they said it was sunny. So how far are you from London?
Probably about 4 hours in the car, something like that.
Okay. Well, that's okay. So then that's reasonable. 4 hours, you could have different weather patterns, things like that. But I guess I was more surprised when I saw London bright and sunny. I was like, that's not usually the response I hear from people who are London based.
Yeah, the UK is get an awesome winter, I think, come in with it being so cold already.
All right. Well, I'm where I always am, here in Waukesha. But so let's talk about, I would love to just hear the background to this, because jumping into employee experience, tech founder of an EXP, like, where did that come from? Where did you decide? Was that something you always wanted to do? Like, how did you end up deciding, you know what I want to do is create an employee experience platform?
Yeah, I grew up as a child thinking I really want to solve things.
It's in your kindergarten wish book. Someday I'm going to do this.
I wanted to be a penguin, but that's another story. I guess really my career around to join in the world of HR inside of learning and development. I worked inside of Orange and T-Mobile as they came together as EE here in the UK. Okay. So all of the challenges that brought of multiple systems, multiple departments, how do you train people, how do you relaunch a brand, how do you get people in a hearts and minds rather than just it's too tech-led by IT that it's super solid and secure and robust, but nobody wants to use it because it feels very tech-led and IT-led, versus something that was particularly HR-led that was much more around hearts and minds and why people want to learn, but didn't necessarily have the robustness or feel like something you pick up on this device. So trying to merge those two things together, and did that successfully in my time there. And then co-founded the bespoke arm of the business, where easiest way to describe that is, can it just? And we say, sure. And we develop that and architect that out. And worked with some brands such as Santander, L'Oreal, Expedia, so big brands on a global scale, and saw commonality time and time again of some of the challenges they face of a lot of tech sprawl. How do they engage people from right the way before somebody joins the organization, which I think we talk about employee experience too much starting on day one, and it starts way back, right the way through to offboarding and how people can come back to the organization and alumni. So seeing that consistency of challenge led us to the point of actually, let's create an employee experience platform that we can still do the can it just builds of technology for folks, but actually we enable them to bring everything they have into one space, that it's nice and easy to get to what you need, consumer grade, personalized, vendor agnostic, no need for IT, create awesome content within 2 clicks, which is often the challenge, that if you layer in, you need a developer or you need a designer, or content looks particularly boring, or it's difficult to do, or
I have no idea that has not been my employee experience ever. I have no idea what you're talking about.
yeah, they're all super slick, right? And I think so much at the moment we're talking about employee experience, and it's like we talked about, it's the buzzword everywhere, right? Everybody's putting experience into solutions or marketing. I think for this conversation, and specifically where I work, like we're talking about digital employee experience, which is not the full scope of what employee experience is, which I think is just really important to note, that technology or just throwing in something else isn't an answer. If we're talking about culture, technology, and physical space coming together to offer an experience, actually that's probably owned by the whole business. It's not solely owned by just HR. Whilst some of it might sit within HR in terms of implementation, it's everybody's responsibility, right, in terms of what the experience is.
Well, it is such a broad thing. And what's funny about kind of the background to this is, I remember when we first connected, which it was a while. It's been a while now. And you were in this space. So even getting some more of the history behind it, you were in this space before it was cool. Because I remember we were talking about this before EXP became a big thing. And then I remember when it all blew up and you went, oh, what now? Like everybody can. Suddenly now everybody thinks that their employee experience, and here you'd been chugging along on this for a while.
Yeah. I think it kind of there was key players that got hold of it, wasn't there? That announced stuff, and we'll probably talk about some of them on this conversation. That I'm not sure that there's a simplification to what they've brought in. I think that it just adds more and more layers.
It's added another layer.
Yeah, I think probably, and again, what we were chatting about backstage, for me, if we're looking about and talking about digital employee experience, that has to be all people across our organization. And we're not just talking about the experience that we have with HR. Because if I don't work in HR, if I work in the development department, or I'm frontline,
marketing,
or I work in a warehouse, I might only engage with some of those HR processes 20% of my digital time at the organization. So when we're looking at, well, what does sort of this work-life flux and balance look like, digital fatigue, where do you go for one thing? We need to be really careful that what we're not creating is a HR hub, a finance hub, a development hub, a hub for this, a hub for this, a hub for this. Because as we talked about, you're going to then need a hub of hubs. And at what point?
That's just it. If everybody's creating their hubs, then we're inevitably going to get to this place where it's like, boy, you know what we really need? We need a layer on top of our layers that was the layer that was on top of all the layers for that functional stuff. And you know what we should call it, right? It's going to be some other new 3-letter acronym.
Yeah. And at the moment, there is this, I think there's confusion in the industry, which vendors don't help themselves. You know, I can't sit here and say, oh, vendors, you know, we're not part and parcel of that. But I do think there's a lot of acronyms around. There's a lot of change inside work, right? I don't think we can call it the future of work anymore. I think it's been happening for some time.
The future's here. It really is.
I think well, hopefully we're at a stage where we can start to just call it all work, whether that's remote work, hybrid work, in a physical space. It's all just work, right? And if we can start to drop that attachment with, we have to box it into being something, and kind of label folks within those boxes, I think that will help if we're intentional and purposeful about the design that we put in for work, which includes employee experience and digital employee experience as part of that. I think that intentionality that enables people to connect to culture, purpose, values, trust in our organizations, that actually we need to move past, well, what office building do you sit in to do things?
So let me ask you this, because I think that piece I think is really important, but I'm really curious as you get into this, kind of where things start with folks, because I do think, the nature of work is becoming so. I read something recently about it's just very fluid is a very good way to describe it. It's like, well, what is it anymore? And we're so busy sometimes trying to box it into certain things. Go, oh, well, no, that's this work. No, that's this work. And it's like, isn't work just happening type of a thing? So I'm curious, as you work with folks, because this does become confusing for people. They're like, well, we have this work happening and this work happening. We have these tools happening. It creates a lot of confusion. And I think everybody's trying to find this nice, easy way to bring it all together. But at the same time, as you said, there is no, and this is what it looks like. So when you work with folks on this who are going down this path, what are some of like the starting points where what ends up leading somebody to go, you know what, we need to focus on our employee experience technology? Like where does that conversation usually start? Because we talked about, like, some people are just trying to fix their intranet. Some people have a complicated tech stack and they're trying to simplify it. Do you see a healthy mix, or what usually is like this festering wound that usually draws people to go, maybe it's time we actually do something about this?
Yeah. I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think there was a lot of reaction during the past 3 years that we all went through and all experienced, and people just did things very reactively in that period. I think that created a bit of a mess. So I think there is an element of people going, right, we've got so much stuff everywhere. How do we create some clear signposting for people? How do you, when you're a new starter into an organization, how do you know what you don't know? How do you tell a consistency of message from one to one to one to many, but allow that to personalize by individual? So
there's all this nuance. It's like, it needs to be personal, but we also need to have it be structured. I mean, there's just so much of that happening right now.
Yeah, which is where I think more and more people have brought in more and more tech to try to, rather than going, actually, what dots have we already got and how can we connect them and understand them? How can we listen, which is really important, to what our people need? So are we actually trying to solve a problem with this whatever that is that you're bringing in? Have we really listened to the challenges that we face across the organization? We're in conversations with a client at the moment that initially their kind of need was, oh, we need another LXP. We've already got 6, but we're going to bring in another one because that one will store.
Going back to like what we talked about, we've got all this we need to layer something on top that's even better.
And now they've gone, actually, why wouldn't we create this one central space in an EXP that actually signposts to the correct things that people need when they need them, but allows me as a user to curate what matters to me, or my working patterns, or my workflow, and share those with other individuals, which, from a Huler perspective, we are that one door, front door. We are that one layer that brings all work technology into one space. So it's not just HR processes or just how you engage at an onboarding point within your journey, but we start right the way back, circling all the way back to where does employee experience start, right the way through to offboarding, and allow that admin can go, hey, this is what we need you guys to know through audience management. And as a user of the system, I can curate what matters to me and share that with people either within my team or even externally. And I think that's the challenge that people are trying to solve, is when you've got this sprawl of lots of stuff, how do you signpost clearly? How does that grow with the business? And how do you consistently start to think about, well, what are those individual personas that we have across the business, again, through listening, and what do they need at what time throughout their lifetime with us as an employee. And then what are we doing for when they leave? You know, if we're wanting to attract people back to the business, are we creating these alumni collections? Are we signposting these are current roles that we've got available? And actually, you might have not had a role fit when you left, but there's now this that might work for you, sort of, and targeting more specific content.
So I want to break this down a little bit, because I think some of the things you hit on right there, I'm starting to categorize this, because as people start, I personally, I see one of the biggest challenges for people is they don't think two things. One, they don't think in terms of system architecture, which again, then layers on this complexity. It's like, well, we need this tool and we just buy this tool and then we have this tool and it's out here. And how does it actually fit into things? But then there's also this component of what are we really trying to solve through this? And you hit on one, which is the single pane of glass, if you will. And I think that's probably one of the ones that many people would at least attribute to an EXP. Yeah, we're trying to create a single pane of glass, the one-stop shop. I hate that term.
Yeah.
Right. But the one-stop shop that everybody has, it's the browser tab that's open in every employee's browser and on their phone type of a thing. And I think that's a category, and there's definitely value in that. But I feel like that's an incomplete description of kind of the chunks of things, because you also hit on some other things, which was kind of the workflow automation type things.
Yeah.
And that's not always accounted for, because then again, if you're just talking single pane of glass, that's where you get into these, well, we're an intranet replacement.
Yeah.
Versus like, yeah, you know, like there's the home page and we just have a bunch of tiles on it that just link you out to other things, but at least there's one URL that you go to.
Yeah.
And that to me feels like you're not saying that's all there is to employee experience.
No. And I think that there's got to be a starter for 10 of that, because that does create that one pane of glass and that clear signposting. But then we do need to start to look at, well, if we're bringing lots into that, let's stay with a glass analogy or door analogy, how actually can we make that content dynamic? So some of what we're starting to explore in our current dev schedule at the moment is actually that could be what we're deeming a smart tile that goes, this is what's up next in your content that you need to take from the LMS, or you've got this many holidays left to take, or this many JIRA tickets assigned to you, or there's this ticket over here that's passed an SLA and it's assigned to you. So actually your one pane of glass then becomes dynamic to all of those systems that sit underneath it, which for me is where you start to add that value that reduces so much of that digital fatigue and burnout of, well, we'll just send another notification. We'll just send another email. We'll send another email. And if you didn't get the first email, we'll send you an insight notification, then a roundup email at the end of the week. Like, at what point are we going to allow content to be more dynamic based on what I need during the working day? So I do think, the value in the signposting first has to be, if you've got all these dots, how are you connecting them? I think then there's this personalization by audience of, well, what do different role types or locations or managers or so on need based on their role.
Well, because like you said before, there is a level of personalization of, okay, yes, you may know what dynamic tiles you need, which I love that you highlighted the dynamic tiles piece, because I think that's how you can, and just even what I know about Huler, how you've kind of differentiated from, yeah, we're just another list of tiles that you can add and remove. It's like, well, if you're a list of tiles that you can add and remove, I mean, that's helpful, but at the same time, it's not necessarily offering you more information, because you still have to now go do all this other stuff. Versus, to your point, if what's really important to me out of this system is the number of vacation days I have left and when the next company holiday is coming up, okay, well, then I can personalize that experience so I can at a glance get that. If I need more, I'll go find it. But really, that's the most relevant piece. And I think that helps with that. But then this other point you brought up of, you don't know what you don't know. And so there is this degree of, if you just give people a blank pane of glass and say, hey, put what you need out there. They may not know what actually they even have access to or what they may need out of that. And there is some consistency in saying, well, if you're a people leader, you probably are going to need some of these things. If you're in this audience, you're probably going to need some of this.
Yeah. And there's that, hey, it's a free for all, which often a lot of intranets are. There's no curation of or by audience type, which might be certainly in Huler, that might be based on org attributes, so is manager, location, whatever, or it might be based on start date. So actually your content is continually changing based on where you are with your time in the organization. And whilst there's this big force on, well, this is what the business needs you to know, actually where we have that different angle is, well, we allow you to create your my tiles, that actually that can be whatever matters to me as a human being, not just as an employee of the organization. So that could be signing off, weekly reports, that could be taking new content, or it could be, actually, I just want to go check the New York Rangers score because I'm going to pick up this device and I'm going to do it anyway.
I'm going to pick up another device to look at that anyway.
I will find a way to do it. And as we've talked about through, collaborations of collections, that we allow people to go, well, actually, this is the stuff that I've curated, or, I have these helpful hacks in my working day that get me straight to what I need, or help with me being focused at certain points of the day. I put those into collections and then I can share that with people. So again, where we're trying to lock people down and we go, oh, no, we don't want people to share in that way, or we don't want people to collaborate in this way, they're going to find a way to do it. They are going to find a way through, whether that's WhatsApp groups or, software that they just access on their own device and they're messaging or emailing their private email. People will find a way. So if we can,
they've got WhatsApp groups, text threads. I mean, they're doing this.
They're doing it right now. But if we can enable them through, actually, we want to bring in technology for good, and we don't want to big brother you and monitor you, but we trust within the organization that these are the things that we're going to enable. At least you have the ability to still be pushing content to them or curating, rather than they're off on a WhatsApp group somewhere that might not be as secure as you want it to be, and you might not be able to see who's in that group and so on and so forth. So I think there's this, at the minute, it's quite a challenging push-pull, but I think it needs to be quite a healthy push-pull between flexibility of device software versus lockdown of quite what IT want you to have.
So let's transition to that a little bit, because I'm really curious what you're seeing from your lens. I mean, I've got a vantage point through conversations I have, but you're in the employee experience space, so you're having more of these, because there is, historically, when we've thought about employee experience, it's been, here's what we think you need as an employee. We're basically going, which is exactly like you said with the intranet. We're going to create this intranet page of all the things we've decided are important for you.
Yeah.
So that's on the one extreme, whereas an organization says, we're defining what your employee experience is based on what we think or what we're going to allow you to do.
Yeah.
Then there's this kind of free reign. Well, actually, that environment basically creates almost this polarization where it's like, fine, if you're going to try and tell me what to do, my life doesn't look like that. So I'm just going to go create a separate world that you have zero control. That's just a bunch of backdoor workarounds around this, or even more of a distraction because I actually have to step out of the ecosystem to go do this stuff. Where are people at organizationally and individually? How are you seeing this change in terms of people's comfort level at an individual level, saying, I actually want more integration of my life with my work, because similar to, like, can we stop calling it hybrid work, remote work, in office work, just call it work?
Yeah.
How are you seeing employees in terms of, can we stop calling it work versus personal? Can we just call it life? Like, I'm just, sometimes I'm working, sometimes I'm doing other things, sometimes I'm doing this and I'm flipping back and forth. And where are organizations on that? Are they starting to make that shift as well?
There's a lot in there, isn't there? And I think it really depends on the organization in part, and it depends on the culture and the values of the organization, because the IT part of this and the tech part of it is the enabler, right? So I remember a conversation back a couple of months ago now, where there was this conversation about, how do I know what people are doing when they're not in the office? And I was like, how do you know what they were doing when they were? It's the output that folks are doing. It's not this sort of presenteeism of whether that's, you know, the office that I'm in or the background that I've gone on a virtual environment. So we've got this, I think there's an interesting dynamic about to hit us around this work-life balance that would suggest potentially they are two separate entities that may coexist but are split. I think that's comes from very traditional working patterns, right? Where we work 9 to 5 and we go somewhere and we come back and we do this. Whereas actually
I come to work, I do my work thing, then after work I turn off, and then I go back and I have the rest of my life.
And work was this place where you would go rather than now. And this isn't new, right? This has been happening for a long time, but has come to the forefront much, much more. But work is now this verb that you do and exists within, as you said, I'm doing life. It's not that I'm doing work and then doing personal stuff. It's my life. Some organizations, I would say, we've got a challenge coming up of this concept of right to disconnect, which, you know, you and I have chatted about. And for those that don't know, will dictate when working systems can or cannot be on during the day. So if I, as the organization, am saying, right, we've got this right to disconnect, so work systems have to be off between the hours of this time. We can't communicate with people past the hours of this time. We're very, very clearly setting out that the flexibility is now removed from when and where you can do that.
You've actually stripped a lot of autonomy away from people.
It goes, which of course it is, at its essence, it's there to protect people's well-being and care about their digital fatigue and overwhelm, but in turn creates so much I guess a rigid structure to what those working patterns need to look like. And asynchronous work is like, well, where does that now go and live? So we've got this kind of challenge of, well, how do you look after digital well-being for folks? That's so important, where there is this, you know, we do need people to be able to avoid burnout. And I think Deloitte have just very recently done a survey across millennials where 46% of them are saying they're stressed all the time because they feel like they're always working and they can't turn off. So I think
there is this digital anxiety of, and this is a little bit of a problem that has come out of this new kind of integration space, is because we had such a historic categorization and then that got blown up. And I don't know that the work was really put into adjusting cultures, adjusting leadership styles, adjusting work styles to say, wait a minute now, we can't just do this. There were these like false expectations that kind of carried over. And I'm not surprised, similar to you, like the reports I read where people literally have a perpetual state of anxiety because they just feel like, I have to be on. I have a hard time going to bed because I'm worried when I fall asleep, I'm going to miss something. And it's whoa, how did we get to this point?
And this pulls us back to that, whose responsibility is it within kind of that burnout and the ability to switch off? And I think if an organization is enabling you to go, actually, we're going to allow you to bring together, let's put them in boxes, work and life. We're going to allow you to bring them together. And again, we trust you, and our culture is such that we measure output, that we're going to let you use and utilize technology in that time period during your working day that makes sense. So rather than this dictatorship of, well, these are the times when systems are off, actually, if we can use the technology, and this is what we're working on, is to go, well, actually, let me flick between what mode that I need and want, right? Like we're seeing that on these devices of, I've got a holiday mode, I've got a focus mode, I've got a work mode, I've got a gym mode. Actually allow me to be able to be in control of curating where my focus needs to be, if that's because you've allowed me to integrate these two entities, because I don't want to always have them split. And if I do, that's okay too, because I can.
And I know some people who would much rather they want two sets of devices. They still want that thing. And to some degree, it's almost a boundary they've set for themselves to say, this is what you bring up is really interesting. And I do see this as being one of the cruxes, and the challenge right now is figuring out whose responsibility is it? And I don't know that the answer is, let's point a finger at any one particular group, because it's like, you as an employee have a responsibility in that. As an organization, you have a responsibility in that. And where do we draw those lines?
It's the enabler, I think. So if you've not enabled the technology to facilitate that to happen, you are, as the employer, saying, well, this is how we do things here. We don't enable this either flexibility or care for digital well-being and digital fatigue. I, as the end user, though, have to take an element of responsibility, which is why Apple have got screen time, right, on your phone, that it can lock you out of an app you download yourself to go and see social media, but it locks you out, or will, flash up to you to say that that's enough for today.
Yeah, you've used up all your Instagram time. You're done. Get off of it.
But we're having to put these restrictions on ourselves. So again, I think if the organization is enabling that through technology and going, hey, we understand that people work differently, we're going to listen to what different people need, we're going to allow this curation of intentional work technology for you to use as you need, but we understand that fits around your life. I think it's the enabler that's really important, and the enablement has to come from the organization in order for it to be taken up and used and seen across the workforce.
I love that you brought up the enablement piece, because to me, that's in many regards, that's how I look at any piece of technology, is that it's an enabler. Buying the right EXP is not going to create the work culture that you want to create. You don't go, oh, you know what? We need this more integrated work culture. Let's buy a piece of tech and then the culture will follow.
Yeah.
It's an enabler of what you're trying to do in that. And if you haven't done that enablement, there's opportunity for you as an organization to lean in. I am curious how you're seeing some of this shift, because it has been interesting as we've gone through this. And this is where I think I still see some agita on the employee side, where they go, I want to be more organized or integrated, but I'm also a little bit nervous, because in some ways I've seen organizations swing towards the draconian Big Brother thing, because they got really uncomfortable with the fact they couldn't see their people anymore. And I love that you said this before, where you're like, why do you think you knew what they were doing when they were in the office? There was this attitude like, well, we used to know that they were working. And you're like, no, you didn't. Like, you did not. You could see them, but they were still shopping on Amazon or checking the news. Like, you didn't lock that down. I'm curious how you're seeing that shift happen, because I could see this potentially being a real risk, where you go, yeah, let's encourage everyone to fully integrate their lives, but there's almost this back end plan to like make sure we're policing stuff, and that could actually cause more destruction to your culture, where people go, wait, I see what's going on here. I want nothing to do with this.
I fully support this. And I think, and again, so much work technology, we need to think about what do we use in our own personal lives, right? So on an Apple device, an Android device, actually they make a huge marketing drive and push around actually how's your data being used. People are much smarter now on what's being tracked, what's this app using that for. It asks permission of, are you okay for your data to be tracked here?
Yeah, are you fine with us sharing this data or no?
100%. So I think it's a little naive and a touch naive inside of work for us to not think that those questions can and will start to be asked by people, to go, well, what are you using this data for? If that's to further development opportunities, or to look after my digital well-being, or to enable me to connect with the purpose and intention of an organization through clear and transparent communication, then brilliant. I don't think people would necessarily object to that. Whereas if it's that Big Brother angle of how many emails did you send, or how many messages on an IM platform did you say, actually you were 30% less productive today, actually is that a measure of productivity? And to pull this out, I think tech can provide the either the enabler of tech for good, or the Big Brother of actually we're monitoring you, which is where you see people putting my sort of fan, so the mouse is always moving, or they've got like something tapping the keyboard, or whatever that might be. People will find a way around it, right? Whereas if we're enabling these things, and actually by using this data, this is how we can make your life easier. This is where we reduce that cognitive load on the systems that we share with you. This is how we just make your interactions with the digital stack that we have easier, because we understand that you're actually going to a system to do a task. So the harder that it is, the more and more we're adding to you. So I think that transparency of how the data is used is so important, and will be the real test of people want to know this now, right? They want to know the organization that they work for and what they stand for.
Well, and now their consumer grade tech is giving them that. And I think that's one of the shifts that organizationally we need to start recognizing. This is a trend that's and anything that happens in the consumer market, it's only a matter of time before it carries and bleeds over into the workspace. And so now people, the digital acumen of people of knowing like, oh yeah, everything I'm doing, I kind of in the back of my mind knew that there was always something happening, but now there's a greater awareness of, yeah, I understand these apps are tracking information for purposes, and I may be okay with that. I may also be not okay with that, and I want to feel like I have a decision in what I'm okay with and what I'm not. And to think that as an organization, oh, employees are never going to ask that question.
Yeah. Indeed.
Yes, they are. And again, I love just how you brought up the fact that people will work their ways around the system.
Yep. But being ahead of that, of going, well, we know you're going to, or indeed, we know that you're going to ask some of these questions. So let's be just really transparent about what we do with it. I think if there's then a challenge where people aren't being heard or not communicated with or not listened to, which when we talk about even where do you start, I think there needs to be, well, what problem are you trying to solve and what's your standard? So what does employee experience look like? Because it's so vague for folks, right? Is it a scale? Is it a happiness factor? Is it retention? Is it, how are you measuring how engaged your people are and what good looks like as an employee experience within your organization? That's so much wider than just HR. Is certainly so much wider than just necessarily whoever looks after the intranet. But I think to have these real conversations that then go, okay, well, now we figured out what employee experience looks like to us and where we are, where we want to get to and what good looks like and how that will evolve as our work landscape of work changes. Then we can start to go, well, what does digital of our employee experience look like? How do we bring stuff together? How do we signpost? We've got clients that have got systems that they've paid millions of pounds for in a 5-year term that never get used because people don't know that they're there. They're going and getting stuff that they use in their own experience and on this device. It's a free download from the App Store, but then inviting other people to it that there's then another license that they need to pay that's going through on expenses because they've not got a clear signpost into what's there. So again, that data transparency of actually we want to signpost you to things that are going to help or connect you to purpose or enable you to curate and share collections of content with folks that just make their work life better and what you need to get to at any given point easier. And I think that's where the data lens starts to come in more and more so.
Well, and on this, one of the things you just hit on there is I think the hard work, maybe it's not so hard, but it's important work regardless. It's hard. Is this idea of we say we want to improve the employee experience, but I don't think that's just a universal thing that you can just go, oh yeah, we're doing that. And so it's the same as everyone else. I think to your point, it's one of these, well, in every organization, when you say we want to create an extraordinary employee experience, or we're looking to improve our employee experience from where it is today, first of all, you got to know where it is today. Like what, like you can't improve something if you have no idea what the quality of it is right now.
Yeah.
But then being really intentional about, well, what does success look like in that? Like, what would really, because at the end of the day, I don't think I've encountered a single organization, large or small, that just overnight has transformed the employee experience. Like just radically, boom, boom, it went from this to that. It's really been this journey of, okay, this is where the employee experience is. Man, these are some of the biggest pain points that we need to tackle. And then let's make progress on that. And then let's not quit and say, good enough. Let's just keep stepping that forward. Do you see consistent areas though, where companies go, these are consistent things that at least give some guideposts signposts to the terminology you use to kind of go, well, I mean, these might be some really key areas where most organizations have major opportunities?
I think, yeah, that communication when it's one-to-one and we sit next to each other, that's easy. I've got quite quick belonging or purpose to the organization, or I recognize why I do what I do into the wider vision, whereas that's really difficult to do on a one-to-many and then personalize that too. Like I said before, I do think it's, taking a bit of a temperature check of where are you people at right now. And it isn't just that role or responsibility of HR, whilst it might live within HR. What are you doing to enable managers to look at this a little bit differently and through the lens of actually work has changed and technology's changed with that pattern, but ultimately we're doing all of this for human beings. We're doing this, and all of this technology should be to help human beings be more successful and more productive at what they do. So enabling that manager shift, I think, is really key. And as we said, the technology just layers and wraps on top of all of that. Because if you can just have your DEX taken care of, because it's in, people know where they need to get to, it's audience managed, it's personalized, people can curate what matters to them, whilst that still needs curation. Because if I went to, I don't know, let's say Spotify or Apple Music, and I've gone, well, I've listened to every single one of these albums, I'm probably not going to keep going back, right? There needs to be an element of freshness or new releases or other people that you listen to. There has to be a draw that takes me back, that's not just the system. But if you've dealt with that and you're curating that and keeping that fresh, actually the other stuff that takes so much more time, attention, consistency around communication, values, transparency, purpose, connection, leadership, all of that wrapped inside of tech. You've dealt with the tech easy peasy to an extent. The human side of what you need to do, I think, is where people are spending a lot of time. And as you say, to temperature check, well, what are we trying to get to is hugely important.
It's interesting how you talk about this, because I do think it's very complicated when you think about the employee experience, but there are elements that I think sometimes we overcomplicate. Where it's like some of this stuff is actually easier than we make it out to be. And because we complicate it, we end up adding on layers of complexity. Now, at the same time, I think sometimes that complexity is warranted. So let's just take an example, because we said we were going to go here. So let's just do this, because when early in our conversations, there were some big names out there, right, that came out with like the EXP of all EXPs. And there was kind of this perception that, oh, this is it. Like we just flip a switch and we've solved the employee experience. And it's, certain platforms are much more complicated to actually pull this off than others. And I'd love to just hear your lens on where do you see some of that stuff where companies go into it thinking, great, we're going into the EXP space, we're going to try and solve this, and we're going to just kind of go the path of what we perceive as least resistance. And then they get into it, and there's almost some degree of complexity that probably doesn't even need to be there. But it is because, well, that's just how it was designed, because it wasn't actually designed with simplicity in mind.
Yeah. We know some of the names that we're talking about, where, just in terms of implementation, we're talking months. Licensing structure is very, very difficult and very costly, but then ongoing maintenance and development support of said platform is really challenging. And even if that wasn't a problem around resource and cost and time to set up and complexity to set up, I'm not sure that gets to the heart of what the user, the end human being that uses said thing needs. Again, it's just boom, boom, boom. This is what the business needs. It should be business experience is what those platforms should be, because that's what they are. And, fair play for what they do, but they look consistent into the suite of tools that they are. Whereas if it's okay with you, buddy, I'll just quickly
let's pull it up. I told you this show and tell is perfectly acceptable for this type of thing, because I know exactly what you're talking about, where some of these employee experience platforms don't actually feel like a different experience. It's not, it's like, well, yeah, this is still this compartment of what I'm used to. So let me pull it on screen, because we're actually talking about.
So this gives you a bit of insight into me and my life, right? So as you can see at the top here, this is my tiles. So what I'm not talking about here is what the business needs me to know. I'm talking about what matters to me as a human being. So this could be, rather than 16 clicks to get to a work-based task of what I need, I get straight to it. But the important thing that you'll see here is this is all pictures of my family, holidays, and pets. Because again, I'm a human being, and some of the platforms that we're talking about don't connect with me as an individual in this way that actually I've curated what matters to me on any given day. Similarly, and I know we touched on just earlier, but if we can start to look at, well, this is what the business needs me to be aware of, and all of that is curated, and it's easy to create content in 2 clicks because we scrape website images to pull down. So let me just move this bar at the bottom here, and we'll just do an easy one for us. If I just go Tesla, if you know it's Tesla, actually I scrape that content. So again, some of these platforms just become this place where stuff goes to die and nobody can find it because it doesn't look great. Whereas actually within 2 clicks, we go, well, let's curate something that people want to engage with. Or equally, if you've not got images, let's not give you a whole image stock library, or you need a designer or a developer. Let's just curate stuff that make people want to engage with content, right? I know we touched on before as well, from that kind of, how do I then start to bring content up and make that dynamic to folks? This is some of what we have in development at the minute, that these tiles then become dynamic to me. So yeah, of course that might be calendar, but I might have calendar.
Right. So there's some Outlook integration type stuff that says, hey, here, what's on your agenda today.
This is all coming in terms of insert system name that you use, and then we're pulling in this dynamic interface. So that could be holidays that you have. And actually, if we can get a read-write API from your existing holiday system, why wouldn't we allow you to book here and then just shoot that back to your system? But from our point of view, this could be absolutely any system interface that you have across the organization, which is where it pulls me back to that. When we're talking about digital employee experience, we can't just focus on HR processes. I appreciate I've gone holiday there because of some of the topic we talked about. But,
well, and it is a relevant thing. Taking time off is a thing that you go, well, yeah, this is an important factor for employees, so let's make sure we have some of that component into it. But that's not where you stop and say, oh, well, all that matters to people is their HR processes.
Yeah, and we've got to go, well, actually, and again, listening to our people and knowing what they want to need and what problem we're trying to solve. We always come back to this, what are we trying to fix, right? So if we can go, well, actually, somebody's digital employee experience is across their entirety of their tech stack, to avoid that, well, we've got this finance hub, we've got this HR hub, we've got this learning hub, we've got this hub over here, and then this hub of hubs that we then create, actually pulling this up now and making that really rich and dynamic, which is, I think, to the question of, again, how are you using the data? Actually, if the content that I'm seeing is purposeful and intentional and helps with my day, reduces, I've sent you loads and loads of notifications and an email notification and so on and so forth. Actually, I'm just contained in this one space, right? To be able to ascertain what I need at any given time.
So I love, and again, going back to, and this was always one of the things I really enjoyed as I got to know you and what you were doing with this. You've brought a layer of consumer grade experience to workplace tech that I think is not something I consistently see. And I do think there's a lot of systems out there that still, it's like, no, we're improving the experience. And it's like, it still feels like my grandfather's office building. It's like, why does it feel like my grandpa's office building instead of the way that I do things in life outside of that? And again, kind of this live tiles concept of, I mean, that iPhone was late to the party with it, but I mean, in many regards, this is kind of the way we're going when we think about user experiences. People have this expectation that it's like, I just think of my iPhone. You have all these apps in your library, but how many of them actually have tiles on your home screen? Well, not a lot of them, because I don't necessarily use them all the time, but I have live tiles because I check the weather regularly. So I want to be able to see what the temperature is at a glance. I have other things that, are really important that are on screen. And then there's other things that I go, I know they're there, and I can get to them, but I don't necessarily use them as
So,
frequently,
yeah. And
type of thing. And pulling all of that together and letting the employee say, this is what my experience looks like, instead of going, no, we've decided this is how your day should fit.
yeah, and this is that duality that we solve, because you have to, it's a business tool, right? So businesses aren't just going to put something in that goes, no, we'll just let people figure it out for themselves. Clearly that's not going to work. There has to be a level of, how can I create a collection of content and share that with other people, because I'm not an island, right? And it's not just me and the business. But what we're enabling here is, of course, do what the business needs you to know. But allow me to curate what matters to me. Allow me to personalize, because I want to see a picture of, me in New York when I was last there. But allow me to potentially go, well, these are some of the apps and some of the smart tiles that I want to pull in, because that's what matters to my employee experience. So this duality of, it's what the business needs and the human being needs is where we're meeting that consumer grade, because nobody says, here's your iPhone out the box and here's all the apps that you can only ever have.
We've chosen which apps you have, and actually they're also locked in certain positions on the screen, because we've decided these are the most important apps for your first swipe. No, because I don't care about half of these.
Do you imagine the uproar do you remember when iTunes put the U2 album on, and everybody had that U2 album on their phone, and they were like, well, you can't put music on my device and decide. So we want this level of flexibility. And work technology has to evolve, both in terms of the UI and the user interface. It needs to feel like something I want to engage with. And if the cost of the business to do that is that you need a whole load of developers, or you need a whole load of designers, the ongoing cost of maintaining something like that is just absolutely huge and not viable. Nobody's going to put that in place. So keeping it easy to create is super important. And then enabling me to create that workspace that matters for me, but then I can get access to what the business are doing. So I'm super stoked to get to this point of, actually, we create these smart tiles and this like a marketplace of, well, why wouldn't I just turn on these things that we integrate with? Because there isn't a vendor out there that we don't play with. Any vendor can come and play in the Huler sandpit, because it's the whole point. I think as vendors, we need to stop doing this and ultimately make it easier for businesses and those that use this software, make that experience easier, which, for us, that's an open door of anybody that wants to go, hey, I want to get a smart tile in there, then let's do it.
So with this, because I think, and even just showing what you showed, I think sometimes, and this, again, it's kind of, I won't just keep using Apple, but when you think about Apple, when it first came out with the iPhone, it was one of those, the beautiful nature of the simplicity behind it often goes overlooked, in terms of, it's like, oh yeah, that's easy. And actually, to me, that's one of the hardest things to do, is create simplicity in things and say, yes, we recognize it's super complicated. You have loads, probably hundreds of apps that your employees use, and it would be impossible for you ever to try and profile every single employee and figure out what exactly they need and all of this other stuff. And so let's create a simplistic experience where you can actually allow the user to do it, because you're never going to create an intranet page that has all the right tiles, period. No matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, it's not going to be right. And the way you get there is that. So I think to some degree, there is this shift in an organization to say, we have to shift our mindset to say, that's a different way of us thinking. And instead of going, we tell you what's important, we almost serve up a suite of, here is some guard posts. Here's a marketplace of things that we think are relevant, so that you don't go, oh, I didn't even know we had that, but you decide what this is. I think the other opportunity that you highlighted, though, and Todd brought this up, and I am curious how this is evolving, is the beauty of the integrations that you just showed in that, the complexity behind the scenes that I think the end user shouldn't have to deal with. That's massive. And I do agree that this is a huge opportunity for vendors to say, can we stop fighting for commanding everybody's attention to our thing, and instead say, the real beauty behind what we do is what we actually allow people to accomplish. How they end up experiencing it is really not important to us. How is that? Are you seeing progress with that in terms of vendors starting to bridge more of these gaps and saying, you know what, let's open up our APIs a little bit more. Let's allow people to have more flexibility with how they choose to engage and interact with our systems. Because that's a mindset shift on the vendor side too. You got to do it organizationally, but you need vendors to kind of go,
and
we aren't here to tell you how to use our app.
Yeah, I think this also is driven from the buyer though. So if the buyer's going, well, actually, what does your openness to collaborate and interoperability and API, what does that look like? Because actually that's going to influence my buying decision that enables me to go, actually, this software's got longevity because I can get information in or out of it or put that into a tech stack that I already have in play. I think some vendors are totally here for it. Similar to me, they're like, actually, ultimately, let's do better for the folks that are using what we provide. Some that's a more challenging conversation to have because they are of a size where they go, well, no, we don't want to play with others, and there's an intentional reason why. But I think as more buyers challenge that and say, but why not? Why would you not enable me to do X, Y, and Z? I think there's a little bit of challenge there that is being seen and is certainly being heard. Because of, as well with what we're able to do with that, the collections that we touched on. So anybody can create a collection, anybody can bring stuff together and share that with people internally, or indeed share that externally. So I can generate a unique link that could be used for TA, that could be used for pre-boarding, that could be used for alumni, or it can be used for restaurants I want to visit next time I'm on holiday. Again, that whole work-life piece. If we can enable that, what we're not doing here is we're saying we overwrite privileges or systems, or we're going to overwrite access to your systems because you've opened up an API. We're sensible about where you allow that and where you don't, because if you've put a link inside of what we do to SharePoint, we're not suddenly going to go, oh, actually, we'll overwrite all of your Active Directory policies and permissions. Of course, we're not going to do that. But it's this element of vendors going, okay, so we've got these guardrails, we've got these APIs, we know how that's going to work. Right, okay, this makes sense because people start with this journey before they're even in our organization. So before they're even day one or pre-board, actually how we interact with them is through this consumer grade platform, one place where we get stuff. We show this interoperability of what we do and how we're progressive right the way through to offboarding. I think vendors have got to go, well, why wouldn't you want to be part of that? And that's not just saying inside the Huler platform, but inside any vendor stack. Why wouldn't you want to be part of that?
Well, and two things on what you just said. So one that just jumped out, and I think sometimes it's these little things that we just don't think about that can have a big impact. But even something as simple as, like you said, curating a set of tiles around like places to eat near the office. Mm-hmm. When you think about the employee experience, those kinds of things matter, because let's say you're bringing people in for whatever, and they're stuck in a hotel, and something as simple as like, I don't know where to eat. Mm-hmm. That can make for a really bad employee experience where you go, I was brought to the office and it sucked because I sat in my hotel and I ate crappy room service. And it was like, oh, you didn't know that this amazing restaurant's like 2 blocks away from you. Totally. Well, nobody thought to tell me. And so, I mean, those kinds of things can have massive impact on employee experience. It seems so simple. They seem so simple. And it's like, well, we could just create a PDF of all the, it's like, yeah, but who's going to make it? Where are you going to store it? How are you going to share it? There's complexity type of thing. But then the other thing I was going to say is this interoperability piece. This is where I do think, and I give credit to this. This is where I think some of the big juggernauts in the space do help with some of this. Teams was one where it kind of forced vendors to go, you've got to be a little more open to integrating, because guess what? People are in teams. So and I think in some ways it's pushed the conversation, which I think has been a benefit from some of this stuff, is it's like, well, people have had to think a little bit differently about, well, no, the only place you're ever going to access my platform is from my platform. Yep. Maybe not. And I think there's room for that, but I love how you're taking that then to the next level of saying, well, instead of just smashing it into some other platform and keeping, my grandpa's version of The Office still alive.
Like, the grandpa's version of The Office. That's the best thing.
Like, let's make it something that feels very natural and intuitive to what you do in life. So
100%. And you just mentioned in there to give you a bit of a flavor of how that works for us. I'll just real quickly share because I know we're nearly at time. But this, exactly as you said, me being able to go, well, I've got restaurants next time I'm going to visit New York. I can add to this consistently, all looks super visual, but actually I can share that on one link with anybody externally, and I can password protect that if I want to. So if it's more sensitive than places to eat near the office, I can password protect it. But actually, I can share that with anybody at any given time. So again, we use the principle there of thinking about the human being, and that actually I might want to check out restaurants.
You might want to, and the thing is that can matter. It can matter a lot. So
that's
I told you we were going to run out of time. I knew we would just be getting started on this. So Nikki, again, I really appreciate the work you're doing in this space. I think it's a very important conversation to be having. Employee experience is being talked about a lot, but I think the action and intentionality behind it is lagging a bit. And so I think this conversation was perfectly relevant for the time. And again, I appreciate you making the time and the important work you're doing in it. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Talk to you later.